Your Honor, members of the jury, this case is about numbers, and those numbers don't tell the whole story. Now, before we go into the specifics, I'm going to ask you to think about a simple childhood exercise. I'm going to ask you to think about a paint-by-numbers picture. Now, you may have done this, you may have had a child do this, but in that picture are shapes set out with numbers in them. Each number corresponds to a color, and as you begin to fill in those squares or circles or shapes with the corresponding colors, picture take shapes. And when you're done, you're left with a beautiful picture. But if you don't fill in all of those spaces, if you leave out some of those colors, you're left with less than the full picture, and you won't be able to see the full story. Members of the jury, my name is Ben Hebner, and I, alongside my co-counsel, Ms. Amanda Stearns, intend to give you the full picture. We intend to give you all of the information regarding Reese Lansing and Alistair City Charity Hospital. Now let's talk about what brought us into court today. It's a decision that Mr. Reese Lansing made, a decision that saved a life and where no actual harm was committed. Reese decided to donate one of his kidneys to save the life of someone that he cared for very dearly, Ms. Taylor Warren. And as I've said, that decision saved her life and did not actually harm Reese Lansing. Now, as you've also heard, the hospital has been found at fault for their actions, for operating on Reese without the proper informed consent, operating on Reese as a minor. And we're here today to determine damages. But you should know, before you determine or consider any damages, that liability and damages are two separate entities. They are completely separate from one another. And just because liability has been established does not mean you have to award any damages. And those damages are not going to Reese. They're going to Reese's parents. Now you're going to hear about two different kinds of damages as we proceed today. The first, actual damages. Things or money for medical expenses, lost wages, future medical expenses and procedures. And when you consider, if you consider awarding actual damages, you can only consider those costs that are reasonably likely to occur. Only those values that Reese is reasonably likely to need. And as I'll touch on later, you're going to learn from the evidence that Reese may not need any of that. In fact, no one can take the stand today and tell you that they are certain that Reese will ever suffer from PKD. Now, also on the table today are punitive damages, or exemplary damages. And those are meant to punish wrongful conduct. But what you need to know about punitive or exemplary damages is that those two are completely separate from actual damages. And should you decide to award actual damages, you do not have to award any punitive damages. And if you do consider to award punitive damages, you can only consider those if you feel that the hospital's conduct was so willful, so reckless, so purposeful, that it deserves to be punished in dollars and cents. But before you consider those damages, I want you to remember, or at least consider what you're going to hear about the hospital's conduct. The hospital acted the way that hospitals do every single day. They relied on the information that their patient, Reese Lansing, gave them and believed it to be true. Now, the picture that the plaintiff's counsel wants to draw for you today is completely different than what I've just set forth. First, they want you to believe, like Reese's parents will tell you, that they think that he is a naive child, incapable of making decisions for himself and appreciating the consequences of those decisions. But they're the same parents who trust Reese's decision-making ability enough to allow him to go to college at the age of 13, to live outside their home. The same parents that, as you'll hear, provide very little financial support for him and allow him to manage his own money week to week and month to month from a trust fund. And they're the same parents that, as you'll learn, found out that their son intended to donate a kidney, did nothing, waited for him to act, and then filed this lawsuit. Now, you're also going to hear from Reese Lansing today as well. And what you're going to see in Reese is a young man who is very brilliant, who at 16 is about to graduate from college, has a 3.96 GPA and an IQ well over 150, approaching 180, and a young man who has already been accepted into Stanford Medical School. You're also going to learn from Reese that he's familiar with these medical procedures and the harms and risks associated with them. And you're also going to learn that he purposefully left his information off of those forms to make this surgery happen for his friend Taylor Warren. And Reese will also tell you that he doesn't even want any money for these actions. Members of the jury, what you're going to learn from Reese Lansing is that his age is just a number, and that that number does not tell the full story. Now, you're also going to hear from two experts. The first, Dr. Charlie Skinner, who has created a life care plan based on some other information to set forth what Reese would need if he became symptomatic with PKD. But that life care plan is rife with inaccuracies. It fails to consider several important factors that will be pointed out by Dr. Sabat. The first and most important factor is that Reese may never suffer from PKD. What you'll learn from Dr. Sabat is that his most recent test results show that he is completely healthy, and that Dr. Skinner's life care plan relies on two previous tests, one done when Reese was just a child, and the second done just months before he undertook one of the most stressful times in his life, when he was a freshman, beginning his freshman year in college. What you're also going to learn from Dr. Sabat is that several things are not considered in Dr. Skinner's life care plan, including the fact that Reese won't miss work if he ever does suffer from PKD. That his treatments will likely be shorter in duration and shorter in intensity. And what you're also going to learn from the evidence today is that the only person that has ever died from this disease is Reese's mother, a woman whose life was full of long nights, lots of alcohol, and lots of cigarettes. And I'm sure all of you know that those three things do not make for a healthy individual and a long life. Members of the jury, what my co-counsel and I ask of you today is that you award no actual or punitive damages to Reese's parents. As I've touched on, the evidence will show you that those are not necessary. And as you move on and as we proceed through this trial, I ask that you remember two things. Think back to our picture. That you have two shapes left to shade in. First, I want you to remember what you're going to hear throughout the trial today about Reese. And that he, no one, will know for certain if he does or if he will ever get PKD. And that there is no certainty that he will ever suffer. And that there are no medical costs, lost wages, or suffering that he is reasonably likely to incur. And second, I want you to remember how the hospital acts and what you're going to hear about them. Remember that they relied on the information their patient gave them, just like hospitals do every single day, based on the belief that their patient would not lie to them. Members of the jury, we ask today that you look at the full picture, not just the numbers. Reese's age, the values in Dr. Skinner's life care plan, those are all just numbers. We ask that when you render